While ginning up this false narrative about this being a crisis, and we can call it caravans, we can call it migrant crises, we can call it family separation, and they will just recycle it over and over and over again. We do not have to be afraid to say immigration is one of the best things to happen to the United States of America.
The 22-year-old honor student was murdered as she jogged alone, jarring Athens, home of the University of Georgia. Late this afternoon, police announced they had a murder suspect in custody, but gave no other details.
Now, if you only look at the mainstream media, they just state they have a suspect in custody, but they obviously know who he is.
We have a suspect in custody for Lakeland's murder. We are obtaining arrest warrants for Jose Antonio Ibarra. He lives here in Athens, but is not a U.S. citizen.
As the New York Post reports, he crossed through Biden's porous border, but was cut loose due to a lack of detention space, and believe he's the same man that was also arrested and cut loose in New York. And I think this perfectly encapsulates the problem with our political leaders today, where both parties are talking about the same border issue, but entirely different aspects about it. AOC and progressives seem to make this about some sort of humanitarian outreach and these best-case idealistic scenarios that are actually impossible to deliver on at scale, while conservatives and moderates are more concerned about the actual American deaths causing direct result to a wide-open border, as Lake and Riley, while absolutely tragic, is not the first and will definitely not be the last incident just like this, whether it's actual attacks or just substances being snuck in, but they will all be largely ignored by the corporate media for the sole purpose of nothing other than protecting their political narrative, hoping you'll ignore the crime and embrace cheap labor.
By the way, speak to your agricultural communities and ask them if they need temporary workers.
They've said it in the past.
Why are you shipping these immigrants up north? We need them to pick the crops down here.
And are actively campaigning on it now.
Works in our fields for 8 hours in the 100-degree heat. He is deserving of a pathway to citizenship.
Then the media comes around echoing AOC's sentiments, saying conservatives falsely suggest anyone can get into the US without a hassle is just a myth, to which Bill Malugin from Fox, who's actually at the border, shows us how insanely easy it is to simply walk into California. And when there's not an open path to come in the US, apparently even American NGOs are assisting them crossing into the country, which apparently assisting them before they encounter DHS is actual trafficking. What makes it worse is some NGOs are reimbursed by FEMA, which is our tax dollars, where our money is also taking migrants from the border, busing them into the US because these shelters are out of money, even though they seemingly have plenty to waste.
Let me show you guys what these NGOs are actually out here providing. They got tons of milk, they got all sorts of pastries, they got bread, they got steaks, they got chicken, they got organic squash from Sprouts, they got ready-to-eat meals, they got guac. It's just being left out here, guys. All of this is gonna go to waste. These are all your tax dollars lying out here on the floor, by the way.
Which is infuriating to know that apparently over 44 million Americans are without food. And although AOC would complain conservatives make the same points over and over, but it's true. As long as these open border policies use American tax dollars to put American taxpayers last, it's always going to be a problem to the average American. They can keep pitching these fantasy scenarios of providing work, shelter, and medical care to an additional millions of migrants, but they've never actually been able to provide any of that to Americans already suffering. And again, they're crying that Republicans won't let them pitch this Disney movie fantasy, while we're concerned about the reality of how impossible it is to properly vet the millions of people passing through the border, as even our president, while wearing the flag of another country, admits how bad it is.
Years right now, they come through the border on asylum. They not able to see an asylum officer. They get a bracelet and they get put in the country and they come back in 7 years.
And the bracelet he's talking about is actually the ankle monitors these migrants from Georgia got. So if we already treat the person like they're on parole, this is probably somebody we don't want here in the first place. Not to mention the fact that parolees typically don't want to tamper with the device to avoid being sent back to prison, but we're openly telling these people we can't properly process you for over 7 years. So what happens when our tax dollars simply ship them to a sanctuary city that won't cooperate with ICE? They cut the ankle monitor off and what? Probably nothing. But worst case for them, they lose their asylum claims 7 years later, and then still, probably nothing. And even as California is a sanctuary state, these migrants are apparently getting free plane rides on America's dime.
Border Patrol agents told us asylum seekers are waiting at the airport day and night to hop on flights.
You can tell who's a migrant and who's not. They have paperwork, they have little folders. You can tell that they're not American per se.
And if you aren't at the boarding gate when agents start to fill empty seats, you could be bumped. That's what happened to Joel Cavazos. He bought tickets to LA from McAllen. Cavazos says he checked in here with TSA, but by the time he got through the checkpoint, the boarding agent told him he had been bumped from the flight.
No, they weren't polite at all. I mean, the initial response was, you missed your flight, we gave your ticket to someone else.
Which again is this common theme of Americans Last. You get caught up processing your IDs, luggage, boarding passes, and being probed. Meanwhile, someone that simply has to have their DHS document and no formal ID gets your seat because they beat you to it. And when journalists bring this up to the governor's attention, their response is blaming the Republicans for what's happening in a Democrat state, calling Congress spineless politicians, and saying they're a model of a safe and humane border. Ah yes, the safety of allowing in someone that goes on a GTA-style rampage in a stolen truck. The safety of migrant kids getting macheted by other migrants in New York. To which, full circle, New Yorkers have had enough with AOC.
We started to see a lot of different...
My name is Jonathan J. Rinaldi. I'm running for Congress against AOC. Get out of here. You don't care. All you care about is illegal aliens and their goods.
And even their governor has had it with the migrants.
But our city and its resources are absolutely overwhelmed. We need a break.
And don't give me that nonsense that you need a break. Until they repeal their sanctuary status and demand other Democrats secure the border, this self-inflicted crisis isn't going anywhere. Because while this is what our media claims is a fortified border, what we see in Egypt is what actual border security looks like. And as we've covered what's happening all over Europe 7 months ago, places like Ireland are beginning to look like liberal cities in the US. And even Paris, France has migrant camps that look the same, where Paris subways are beginning to look like a third world country. It's in stark contrast to a place like Japan, as they've also had their issues with a migrant smashing a Shinto shrine. But then they have a strong Japan is for the Japanese movement. Now obviously some say Japan is xenophobic, and that's probably true, but right now in America we're looking at an election where one man refuses to acknowledge the problems at the border and hopes the corporate media will cover up the crimes occurring in results, and the other party is being called xenophobic for actually acknowledging reality. So the average American has a ballot to cast that puts us down one of two paths. Now obviously some stories are a bit more serious than others, but if you appreciate alliteration over my concise commentary, hopefully I've earned your subscription, then go check out my more lighthearted take on how New York City is taking on their third world levels of crime with a tactical dance team.